Hello everyone, my name's Cliff and welcome back to my channel. This is Cliff's Dark Gems. Today, as a result of watching lots of movies from the 70s, 80s and 90s, from the old school Watchathon, I'm going to be doing a list of my top 10 80s horror movies. Stay tuned. Okay, I've watched so many 80s horror movies in my life, so it was really difficult to put this list together, and I do have some special mentions, but I'm not going to be talking about them at length. I think I'm just going to add 4 in here. 2 that are relatively well known omissions from this list, and 2 lesser known gems. First of all, what's not on this list is Hellraiser and Halloween. Now Hellraiser, because I love Clive Barker novels and I love all his written work, but not so much his remakes. There are 1 or 2 exceptions, but Hellraiser is not one of them. Halloween, I'm not a big fan of slasher movies. There's 1 exception on my list that we'll come to later, but Halloween for me, yeah, a Friday the 13th and Halloween just don't really do it for me. Okay, then there are 2 lesser known omissions from this list, and there could have been a lot more, and that is Monkey Shines and The Company of Wolves. Yep, that's right, The Company of Wolves. Now The Company of Wolves is basically a fairy tale retelling, very unsettling, scary, but beautiful looking movie. A little bit like Red Riding Hood, but just completely twisted and warped. And Monkey Shines is a very underrated, unknown gem. And it's about this monkey that turns into a killer. And it's surprisingly terrifying and surprisingly suspenseful, and both are worth checking out. Okay, let's get to the list. Now number 10 on my list is quite a surprise entry. I don't think many people will have this in their top 10, but for me it is just a cheesy horror comedy classic that is so 80s, full of music and full of amazing soundtrack, and that is The Lost Boys. And it is about this family, a divorced mother and 2 brothers, and they move into this small town, the murder capital of the world, where they stay with her eccentric father. Now this town is teeming with vampires, and the boy's older brother ends up drinking some blood, getting in with the wrong crowd, and becomes one of them. And the boy has to do everything in his power to try and stop him turning completely and to save his life. And he gets the help of these 2 young vampire hunters. Now I love the setting, the carnival setting. As you know, I'm crazy about carnivals. I love the music, I love the fashion, and it's just pure nostalgia and goofiness and silliness, but so much fun. That is The Lost Boys. Okay, in 9th position we have Cat's Eye by Stephen King. Now this is an anthology of 3 tales, and they're all linked together by a stray cat who is on a mission to go and find this little girl in distress. The little girl played by Drew Barrymore. And as the cat tries to find this girl, he goes on various adventures, and some of the tales are really chilling. There's not so much blood and gore in this movie. It's more just serious build-up of suspense and tension. The one is Smoking Ink, I think, Smoker's Ink, which is a very weird way of stopping smoking. And then the other one, which is my favourite, is The Ledge, which is a great little short story, but don't watch it if you're afraid of heights or even pigeons. Peck, 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 peck. That is Cat's Eye. Okay, in 8th position, now we have many great John Carpenter films. And in my mind, this is one of his underrated classics, and that is The Fog. Now, The Fog is about this mysterious fog that envelops a small seaside town. But what has actually happened is that there are dead seamen and dead mariners that are in this fog. that have got vengeance in their mind when they come onto the small town. And I'm not going to say too much more about the plot because I don't want to give away any spoilers, but this is really an eerie, atmospheric, menacing little film. Very different to John Carpenter's Halloween, where you know who the killer is, but there's a real sense of dread, and there's a real sense of almost this haunting tension, and it's wonderfully well realized in this film. So basically The Fog is a very slow burn. I don't expect any incredibly violent scenes like with Michael Myers and with Halloween. It is a slow burn. There's tension. You don't really get a big feel for what these characters, these ghosts are in The Fog. But of course there are plenty of deaths, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful movie. Well worth watching. In 7th position we have a cult classic, a comedy horror movie called An American Werewolf in London. Now what happens is these two friends go off and they find themselves in this remote village, and the locals warn them, they're superstitious about this creature out in the wilderness, and they go off on a walk, and one gets bitten and dies, and the other one survives, and guess what he becomes when he goes back to London? A werewolf. Now this film is known for its incredible special effects and transformations. There's one scene in particular that really stands out, and it's just an excellent film all round, and it's got a surprisingly tragic, sad ending, but this is definitely one of my favorites, and it's by John Landis, I presume. Yes, John Landis. It's American Werewolf in London. Next we have a really fun but genuinely terrifying horror movie, and that is Fright Night. Now this horror-loving boy, this teenager, is absolutely convinced that he's living next door to a vampire who's just moved in recently. And obviously nobody believes him, and so he tries to get the help of this ex-TV star, a vampire killer, who's washed up and is pretty much a nobody, and the two of them have to investigate this when strange things start to happen. Now this is a hell of a lot of fun. It's a bit cheesy, but the scares are very effective, and it's pretty gory, and it's just a fun 80s horror movie, horror comedy in parts. That is Fright Night. Okay people, now we're getting serious, down to my top 5. In 5th place we have A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now this is, you could call a slasher movie, but it's completely original because the slasher, Freddy, gets you in your dreams. And I just love the idea that you're not safe even when you are asleep. So this is just the most original premise, and as far as I'm concerned this is absolutely terrifying, particularly the first in the franchise. Now what happens is this ex-child murderer, Freddy Krueger, is hunting these teenagers in their dreams, and they've got to try and band together to stop him. Now the violence is so creative, the kills and the deaths are so original and creative, and sometimes highly entertaining. There's also this dark humour that kind of runs through, but it is genuinely terrifying, and I just love the way the suspense is kept on throughout the whole movie. And as I mentioned, there are loads of sequels. This is probably one of the most popular horror franchises of all time, but in my mind this first one is indeed the best. I think I enjoyed Dream Warriors as well, and there were a number of others that I enjoyed, but as with most franchises you get to a certain point and then they start going downhill, unfortunately. The original for me is the best. That is Nightmare on Elm Street. Okay everyone, in 4th position we have John Carpenter's The Thing. Now this has to be one of the most horrifying, terrifying movies ever made. It is set in the Antarctic at a remote station with these men, and this dog comes up to them and is carrying this terrifying entity known as the Thing. Now this thing can take on any shape or form of these men, can basically absorb them, copy them, so you never know what's happening. There's a sense of paranoia throughout the film, absolute terror, and one thing the film is infamous for is some of the special effects for that time. are just truly horrifying, like you cannot believe. And I don't think the men are picked off one at a time. And yeah, I don't think there's any other John Carpenter movie that comes anywhere close to the thing. Okay, in third position we have possibly the biggest surprise on my list. None of you will be expecting this, but that is Creepshow. That was created by a joint venture by Stephen King and George Romero, who did The Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead. And this is just a nostalgic favourite of mine. And it's anthology, and as far as I'm concerned, it's horror comedy, in some cases more comedy. And it's inspired by e-comics. It's got a real interesting tone and feel about it. And every single one of the stories in this are gems. From this Father's Day, he just wants to eat his cake, to a Stephen King cameo where he basically gets taken over by this green stuff, this green goo. He's not the best actor in the world, but still, it's just hilarious. And I think my favourite out of all of them is this one called, what's it called? Something to Tide You Over, starring Leslie Nielsen as a pretty bad arsehole who catches his wife having an affair, so he decides to basically kill them off by putting them in beach sand up to their necks and waiting for the tide to come in. And he watches the whole thing from the comfort of his home. I'm not going to say anything more after that, because it gets really creepy, really silly, and I love it. It's horror comedy at its best. That is Creepshow. In second position we have The Evil Dead, 1 or 2, take your pick. And this is a camp, gory, over-the-top classic, starring Ash, played by Bruce Campbell, who really is a cult figure, and he's just a super cool hero in these movies. And it's about these young people who go off into a cabin in the woods, and they come across the Book of the Dead, or the Necronomicon, I think, Necronomicon, something like that. And when they open this and they read from it, you can imagine, all hell breaks loose. It becomes bloody, it becomes violent, and also very, very funny. Now, you cannot watch this movie if you have a weak stomach, because they go over the top with the special effects and the gore and the blood, and it's done on purpose. But eventually, if you've watched it for about half an hour, you just sit back and just laugh, because it's not subtle on any level, but it is a lot of fun, and it is scary. It's also very scary. There's one woman in particular who gets, I want to say, molested by a tree. I think, yeah, that was a little bit over the top. But anyway, Evil Dead, number 2. Okay, so we come to the number 1 spot. Now, this is not only my favourite 80s horror movie of all time, it's definitely in my top 1 or 2 favourite horror movies of all time. And that is The Shining. Now, I love the book as well as the movie, and I know that there are differences between the book and the movie, but you cannot put down the movie. It is gorgeous. From the filmmaking, directing, it's a stunning shots, terrifying camera work, and from the incredible soundtrack, everything about this movie is beautiful and scary and terrifying. It's basically about a man, Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson, and he goes with his wife and child to stay in the Overlook Hotel over the winter. He's got a job as a caretaker. Now he's a sort of struggling alcoholic, or he's an ex-alcoholic, just tenuously, and his wife is a bit of a nervous wreck. In fact, the one criticism I have about the movie, just one criticism, is the wife is a bit of a pain in the arse, and she does a lot of screaming. But still, it's just, I think Jack steals the show for me. Now their young son, Danny, is basically, he's got these psychic abilities, which makes him very vulnerable to what's going on in this hotel. And some of the imagery, as I say, it's terrifying. It's so beautifully shot. The music is so scary, but really the one thing that makes this movie so horrifying, above all of the supernatural stuff, is that this main character's disintegration, his mental breakdown into madness, and just the thought that that can happen in a family so easily, and he breaks down and threatens his family and just becomes this complete monster. For me, that was more terrifying than all of the other supernatural stuff that was going on, and that was truly disturbing. That is just Shining, and I think this is a movie that will stand the test of time, and it would definitely be, I think, in most people's top 10s. Let me know what you think. Okay everyone, that was my 80s top 10 horror. Let me know what you think. What would you add to the list? Do you think any of my decisions are not worthy of a top 10? As I said before, please be gentle. This is a personal choice. It is subjective. Everyone has a different choice. That's what's so interesting about these top 10s. But let me know what you think in the comments below. And please feel free to like and subscribe. And take care. Keep those pages turning. And keep on watching that horror. And we'll see you next time. Cheers.